morning, everyone. My name is Kathy Aros, and I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of Greater Tucson. Thank you so much for joining us today. Now, if you don't associate Black history with Southern Arizona history, well, you'd be wrong. Arizona's Black history actually started nearly 500 years ago when Esteban de Durantes, a man of African descent and part of the ill-fated Coronado expedition, became the first non-native person to visit what is Arizona today. Now, I don't know if today's program is going to be going back quite that far, but the point is, there's a lot of Black history in Tucson that they don't necessarily teach in schools. We are definitely going to fix that. I would now like to introduce the moderator for today's program. He serves as a family mediator, parent coordinator, and educator for the Pima County Superior Court's Family Center of the Conciliation Court, and is an adjunct instructor at the University of Arizona South and Pima Community College. He's also a valued Greater Tucson League board member and co-chair of the State League's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. Please welcome Victor Bowleg. Victor, take it away.
Thank you, Kathy, and I'd be remiss to mention that I'm currently at juvenile court. I'd like to welcome everyone and say good morning and welcome you to an informative program on African-American Black history here in Tucson, Arizona. My name is Victor Bowleg, and I'm excited to serve as moderator for this educational program today. And I would first like to say to all our relations, past, present, and future, we'd like to give thanks. And in the mode of the Sankofa, if you're not familiar with Sankofa, Sankofa is from the Akin people in Ghana. And it's a symbol of a bird who's flying forward with its feet forward and its head turned backwards, looking to the past. And part of the symbol is to reclaim our past and to be able to still move forward. So again, thank you. And in the method of Sankofa, we go forward. This program will last, this is our last program, spring program for voter education. This program was initiated and planned by members of the Greater Tucson League of Women Voters, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization, which as an organization neither supports or opposes nor endorses political parties or candidates. So we're going to have 5 knowledgeable panelists today with a variety of experiences from Tucson. 3 of our panelists will have 15 minutes for their presentation. 2 panelists will have 10 minutes each, speaking on the same topic. I'm going to introduce each panel member prior to their presentation. Our timer today will be Tracy Peterson. We'll be sure that all the panelists have equal time for their presentation. Let's move forward with our first panel member. Our first panel member will be Ms. Barbara Lewis. Barbara Lewis is from the Dunbar Coalition of Board of Directors. She's an alumna of the segregated Dunbar School and also the Dunbar Pavilion Board of Directors. Ms. Lewis represents both the past and the future of Dunbar. Ms. Barbara Lewis.
Hello, everyone. I would like to begin by giving you a mini or short history of the Dunbar School, which is now the Dunbar Pavilion. For those of you that are familiar, you know Dunbar was the only segregated school in Tucson. And those of you that are not familiar, here's some information that's important. First, prior to statehood, when Arizona was a territory, there were no segregated schools in Arizona. There were 3 elementary middle schools in the territory at that time, Davis and Drachman, which were established in 1901, and Roscrouge, which was established in 1907. In 1912, when Arizona became a state, it adhered to the law of the land, which mandated that African American students could only attend schools specifically built for them. The first of those schools in Tucson was called the Colored School, and it was held in a converted undertaker/bakery building on 6th Street and was attended by the 11 Black students in Tucson at that time. After protests from the African American community, it still remained that their protests were unheard. The African American community, with the consent of TUSD, were able to name the school. Now, from 1912 to 1917, however, that elementary and middle school student population had increased to such an extent that the colored school was inadequate. And with the segregation mandate still in place, this led to the construction of the school at 300 West 2nd Street, its present location. So when the African American community, like I said, with the consent of TUSD board, got together, they decided to name the school Paul Laurence Dunbar, after the famous internationally known Black poet. Located in the first predominantly Black neighborhood in Tucson, the school became the focus of the neighborhood and was simply called the Dunbar neighborhood. As the student population continued to grow between 1918 and 1946, Dunbar, in order to accommodate this growth, went through many additions and renovations. Still, it was always underfunded in relation to the other schools. It had no cafeteria, auditorium, gymnasium, or library. The school books allotted and received by Dunbar were those used and outdated when the other schools were finished with them. In 1958, a new wing was built at Dunbar. It would give the school a combined cafeteria, auditorium, and gymnasium, plus 23 additional classrooms. And it would be connected to the older structure by a large enclosed hallway. Before kind of summing this up here, I hope you'll allow me to give you some personal observations and feelings about Dunbar. I was a student there from 1942 to 1950. And although we were comparatively deprived, it was a very nurturing and encouraging environment. It was the only place Black teachers could teach and the only place K through 8 students could attend. We were a family, and our teachers felt it their duty to teach us and inform us well beyond those outdated books. They gave us courage and confidence that we could be the best, which became our motto, in whatever we decided to achieve. And in turn, we, the students, were determined not to let them down, evidenced by the high ratio of professional and talented students Dunbar produced. We loved Dunbar then, and we love Dunbar now. So, the end of school segregation in Tucson came in 1951, and with it, the renaming of the school to John Spring Junior High School, after one of the first Caucasian teachers and principals in Tucson. This, it was said, was done to erase traces of segregation. But many said it was because lots of folks didn't want their children attending a school named after a Black man. The school was closed and abandoned in 1978 because they said segregation still existed, mainly because of housing patterns. TUSD made attempts to sell it and even give it away with no takers. Finally, in 1995, the Dunbar Coalition purchased the building with its collapsed ceilings, corroded and rusted plumbing, rotting electrical systems, all the windows broken out, plaster falling from the walls for $25. The only residents at that time were pigeons, rats, cats, squirrels, and termites.
Thank you, Barbara. What I'll go on and do is let me introduce Debi Chess, who's also sharing time with Barbara Lewis. Debi Chess serves as Interim Executive Director of the Dunbar Pavilion. Ms. Chess has over 25 years of experience in nonprofit program development, including arts-based economic development and youth development. And Ms. Chess will also speak on Dunbar. So I'd like to introduce Ms. Debi Chess.
Thank you, Victor, and thank you, Barbara, for the history. Interestingly enough, I am currently in Dayton, Ohio, just a stone's throw away from the Paul Laurence Dunbar home. And many people don't know that Paul Laurence Dunbar was born in Dayton, Ohio, from Dayton, Ohio. So it's really wonderful, even in spirit. I definitely always am, and his home is right down the street. And so I'm going to pick up in 1996, where Barbara left off, where the Dunbar Coalition came together to purchase the building from TUSD for $25. So the Dunbar Coalition is made up of members of the community that had a vested interest in preserving the history of the Dunbar and its impact on Tucson as a whole, and particularly the Dunbar Spring neighborhood. And those individuals came from organizations. So what comprises the Dunbar Coalition is the Tucson Urban League, the Juneteenth Committee, the Dunbar Alumni Association, the Dunbar Spring Neighborhood Association, and the Dunbar Spring Neighborhood Association. So those organizations, I hope I didn't miss one, those organizations make up the Dunbar Coalition, which is the governing body of the Dunbar Pavilion. The Dunbar Pavilion exists now is evolving as an arts and culture center and housing entrepreneurs, education opportunities. The tenants of Dunbar are working to align with our mission in that their mission is to elevate and center the African American community, and also have an interest in what the history of African American community contributes to Tucson as a whole. Our current tenants include Freedom Etc., a Black-owned screen printing company, streetwear company, Adia Textiles, textile artists, the Ideas School, which is a private school, operates out of our space, the Dunbar Barber Academy, which is the largest barber academy in the Southwest, graduates the largest number of barbers in the Southwest. A Warfield Kitchen is also in our space, and Corey Press, which is a nonprofit art printing literary organization that centers LGBTQ and women of color works. And so as we continue to look at what Dunbar can contribute to the community as a whole, one of the most significant things that happened for the Dunbar in the last 5 years was we were placed on the National Register of Historic Places, which is a very distinguished moniker to have, and really solidifies the importance of the African American community in the African American community, not just in Southwest Tucson, but in the nation as a whole. We are also applying for quite a few grants that center the importance of Black space, preserving Black space in Tucson, such as the Civil Rights Memorial Grant from the National Park Service, and from the National Endowment for the Arts to really look at developing our archives, digitizing our archives. We're working with the University of Arizona Center for Digital Humanities to really make sure that the content and the things that Barbara talked about, the photographs, we have quite a few oral histories that are preserved and made accessible to the community as a whole, and don't get pushed aside and our history not centered. So that's currently that's the major work of the Dunbar. Today, there is a pop-up entrepreneur or shop, I guess, on the grounds of the Dunbar, which is sponsored by the Tucson Urban League. And this will be the second time that they've done that. And it's something that we look to continue to support the Urban League in hosting on our property. And I neglected to mention that the Urban League is tenants now at the Dunbar. And so, we are really excited about the future of the Dunbar. We've gone into a really deep reflective moment of strategic planning. As the Dunbar has evolved, it has moved into some spaces that, we've kind of challenged ourselves to be really mindful of who we serve and how we serve them. And so that's the direction of the Dunbar now. Our new fiscal year will be coming up July 1st, and that will present even more opportunity for folks to engage with the Dunbar and learn more about what we're about. And I encourage you to visit our website, the Dunbar Pavilion, thedunbartucson.org, and learn more about Dunbar's history.
Thank you, Debbie. Very informative. We'd like to move on to our next panel member. Our next panel member, Ms. Sadie Shore, is a member of Tucson Unified School District Governing Board and only the second African-American in its history. Ms. Shore is an artist, community organizer, and activist. Ms. Shore created the ongoing Sugar Hill Oral History Project, archiving generations of Black family histories. Thank you, Ms. Sadie Shore.
Thank you, Mr. Bowleg, and thank you to the League of Women Voters for putting on this panel today and bringing all these amazing women together to celebrate Tucson's Black history. My name is Sadie Shaw. I am an artist, an art educator, a community organizer, and yes, I was just recently elected to the TUSD Governing Board. And I know that Ms. Lewis definitely put it really well about, Dunbar and how it was such a pillar in the community. I think that, these schools, Dunbar and Roosevelt Elementary, which is where Pima College is now, Pima College downtown. These were, very important to the community. And although Sugar Hill as a neighborhood, Sugar Hill, Dunbar, South Park, 8 Mountain, all the historic Black neighborhoods in the city are, separated by miles and streets. We're still very close knit, and we have different family members going to different neighborhoods, and our schools are like really a great connector for us. And so my family moved to Tucson in the early 1950s into the Sugar Hill neighborhood. My dad and some of my other family members went to John Spring before it was closed down. And so I think, all of the panelists here really speak to the fact that, Tucson does have a really rich history. And so I created the Oral History Project kind of to document that history. Also, I lost many of my family members from Sugar Hill, and losing them, I saw, how not only my history was being lost, but the history of my neighborhood and other family members. And so I think Mr. Bowleg put it really well about the Sankofa, about reclaiming our past so that we can move forward and kind of shape it through the eyes of history. And so instead of like kind of summarizing everyone's oral histories, I just put together a video that kind of is a snippet of each person's just a highlight of what they shared. So here is Miss Beatrice Humphrey and her husband Warren. So this video I compiled gives you two perspectives. First, the parents who moved in the, whether it was the late 40s, early 1950s, and then the children who were a part of those families. Although they're now older now, it gives you like, the older perspective, and then growing up in Sugar Hill in its golden days. And so, yeah, each person has a different perspective, of course. You'll hear some tidbits about like redlining in the neighborhood, about white flight, and about, the glory days when it was such a tight-knit community, and then sort of when it started to be gentrified by the university, and like there was kind of like a breaking up of the neighborhood. And so, yeah, I'm just going to let people speak for themselves. And if you want to listen to the full Oral History Project, you can view it on SoundCloud at soundcloud.com/Sugar Hill Neighborhood. And last but not least, I will say that there's also some photos from the Donna Liggins Center over its long history when it was first called the Northwest Center, and then changed to the Donna Liggins Center. So there's both the photos of the people speaking, and then some just random photos of the neighborhood, its festivals, and just the people who live there.
I'm Warren Humphrey, and my mother is Beatrice, and my father is Warren Humphreys.
Beatrice Humphrey, 11124.
My mother, father, and their dog
Honey.
drove from Cleveland, Ohio.
Yeah, oh yes.
Out here.
Sight unseen. And when we pulled into this place here, on a highway for 3 days with this big dog, and so they was working on things because somebody had got in here and broke up the cabinets and all. So somebody was in here working on it. And I was sick. But my brother-in-law from California, he owned a car place there, pulled right in behind us when he found out he was here. He said, "You mean to tell me you all left what you did in Cleveland to come here to something like this?" And my husband said, "Please don't say anything." Say, "Cause B is so upset. She done come here to something like this here." And like I said, there was no sidewalks. There was nothing here.
But Mama was working at Levy's, and she had all the clientele from Mexico, and she had the movie stars.
My name is Jack Anderson Jr. My father's name is Jack Anderson. My mother's name is Neres Anderson, Neres. And they all migrated out of Texas. When they moved here, the only place you could actually stay when they moved here was South Park area because of the racial thing. And then I think they opened up downtown area. It used to be a place downtown in Myers Street. There was a spot where Dunbar, that area is over there, that was also available to minorities. And they moved in that area, which was considered the west side. And there's an area there in the Dunbar area. And then where you see the Tucson house is located now, that area was another little spot of minorities, is black, Indians, some of everybody there. And I grew up in there. as a young person. So that's how they got here, and that's where they moved. And I was about 6 years old. We moved over there from the Dunbar area. That's what it was, Dunbar then. And then to, I guess you would call it the Estevan. It's all kind of located Estevan Park over there. So, and that's pretty much our story. You know, my mother came out to support her aunt, found a job, called for my father, and him and my sister came out. And but his story was, he came here with qualified papers to be a heavy equipment operator, to build homes or to build highways. And he was putting in applications everywhere and he couldn't get a job. Till finally somebody, one of his friends, told him that, man, they're putting your application at the bottom of the list. You will never get hired because you're black. He could get a job as a janitor, which is what he did. So he was an angry man deep down inside because he had to spend most of his life doing work that he didn't like to do. I didn't know he was so angry about it until he just, I guess he'd been holding in and I never saw that. But that was his story. So he ended up, because he was been a janitor or a custodian, as he liked to say, as long as I can remember. Matter of fact, one of the first jobs I ever had, you know. So thanks to him, I can do that well. That has helped me through the years when I couldn't get no other job I could get. I was a blessed man to have 2 working parents at home. Didn't know I was blessed like that. But that was our neighborhood then, and it's changed a lot, but some of the stuff we work for is turned out to be a positive thing, you know. Like I said earlier, now it ain't just us, it's some of everybody that's utilizing this park. You know, now they charging everybody. It didn't start out like that, but and then the other thing about the Sugar Hill thing, I like to see some of those righteous names get put up there that you never hear of, people that fought for it, you know, because you see all the people up there on that, I won't say no more.
Who are some of the people that you want honored from the neighborhood?
Terry Wayne Dixon. He was, all the stuff I just went through, he was right, we were brothers at that. He fought for this community too. Terry Wayne Dixon. Miss Lillian Ross right there. The only adult, one of the few adults that when it was on, she stood there with us. She wouldn't let us get stupid with the police, but she kept the police, wouldn't let the police get stupid with us either. Right in the middle of it. You know, right in front of our house a couple of times I've seen it. We had the police around it. You know, she said then, that's how deep it was. They had guns, we had guns. Because we learned that, hey, you bleed just like we bleed. You know, and you're just not going to dog me out like that. And that's how we felt about it. Somebody once told me, time brings about a change. So a lot of that I attribute to time and the changes. A lot of families that were here, they're not here anymore. Houses got sold. People bought houses. The U of A has been eyeing all of this property for years. They got to expand. You know, so that's, and it didn't happen overnight.
Okay, I'm Bobby Morrison, and my parents are Ethel and Oscar Morrison Sr. I was born here in Tucson, 1950. Right directly over my backyard fence lived Dr. Hosey. And Dr. Hosey was a surgeon. Well, I think he was the first black surgeon here in Tucson. One of the big events that occurred there on 6th Street, right in front of my home, was the day that a friend of mine, the name was Ronnie Thomas, was struck by a car. That was not something that occurred a lot in Tucson and Sugar Hill. And Ronnie Thomas and his mother were, Ronnie Thomas's mother was a very well-known Christian woman who had such strong faith. She would actually heal people in the community. She was known as a healer. With the word of God, she'd lay her hands on people and these people would recover. And a car hit Ronnie, and we heard the noise, and then we went over, and Ronnie was on the curb bleeding to death and crying. And I'll never forget that. It was 3 or 4 of us, and we saw his bike and the blood streaming down, and he was yelling for his mother. And someone said, if somebody doesn't do something soon, this kid's going to die right here. They called for the ambulance, and it came, and it took Ronnie into the hospital. This is what I was told later. And they said that they told his mother that your son's going to die within the next hour. He's lost too much blood, and there's nothing that could be done. And Mrs. Thomas put her hands on her son and prayed and prayed and prayed. And she actually brought Ronnie back to life. Not that he was dead, but he was dying. And the doctors themselves said, when we went in and saw him, that there's no way in the world he should have recovered from the injury.
My name is Christine Leona Dillon. My parents, both deceased, was Leon and Henrietta Anderson. I was born in Mississippi, December the 13th, 1928, in Magnolia, Mississippi. And when I got into this area, I didn't know. I just saw it in the paper, and I had my husband come over with me and called the guy that was taking care of it, and he didn't say nothing. And I guess the lady that sold it to me, she evidently didn't know, because after a couple of weeks, the realtor came back and said she would refund the money, and everything for. I say, I'm sorry, the papers have been signed. But she didn't know it either when she sold me this house. She didn't know that blacks wasn't supposed to move in here. When she had it up for sale, it was just for whoever bought it. That was really strange. But I say, I guess it was meant for me to have this house.
Once you moved in here, the white families around you started...
They moved. Yeah. But they were friendly before they moved. They had come over and introduced themselves. Because you see the house right in front of me? That wasn't there. This little mess they got over here, that wasn't there. And this house next to me was there. I was the only house right here. The kids had playground all around to play. When we bought the house, it was 2 years old. There was no blacks in here when we moved in here.
What were your neighbors like?
They were really nice. They came over and introduced themselves, and they were nice. I had no problem with them. But naturally they moved, but I didn't have no problem.
My name is Kevin Woodard. My parents' name was Robert Woodard and Mary Jane Ross. They came to this neighborhood in 1953. Sugar Hill is one of the greatest places you could grow up in. It kind of was like a fantasy come true. I mean, it was well-off neighborhood. It didn't have a whole lot of things when I was growing up. My grandmother was Lillian Ross. She fought for a lot of things to happen. She made sure that the pool was built, the centers were built, and she also started the Rumbe here. That was in 71. She basically got me started. She was an activist, and I guess I'm an activist too. I really love this neighborhood, and I want to make sure that this neighborhood comes back to where it used to be. This neighborhood was a village. It wasn't one person raising a child. Everybody raised everybody's child. I mean, if you did something at the center, by the time you got home, everybody in the neighborhood knew about it. Right. So it was a great place to grow up. I mean, everybody was real respectful here. Most of the people that lived in this neighborhood were middle class. they didn't really have a whole lot of money, but they had more money than others. So the economics was totally different over here. We had things that other neighborhoods didn't have. Sugar Hill was a beautiful place to live. I mean, growing up here, I was born in 1961, and the 60s, late 60s, when I was growing up here, there were so many activities, the centers, the parks. I mean, there was A.C. Hart. He was one of the activity directors for the Northwest Center. I mean, they taught us things that we had never seen out of this neighborhood. They taught us how to play golf, tennis. I mean, they showed us the respect so we could turn around and give respect to other people.
Right on. So that was just a brief showing of different people's perspectives. I know that Kate put the links in there if you want to hear more from each one of those people. There's definitely, so much more to know, so many more stories that haven't been heard yet. And so I'm just thankful to have recorded some, and looking forward to, recording more as time goes by. Yeah, but thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sadie. I'd like to move on to our next panel member. Next panel member is Dr. Tani Sanchez, who is a professor of Africana Studies at the University of Arizona and author of Didn't Come From Nothing, an African-American story of life. Her primary interests are racial representation in the media, the African-American history and culture. Dr. Sanchez was the first president of the Tucson chapter of the Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society. I'd like to welcome Dr. Tani Sanchez.
Hello, and thank you for inviting me to the panel, Mr. Boleg, and also the League of Women Voters. What I'm going to do is talk about the early days of the Arizona chapters of the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs. Now, this group in Arizona was small, and a small percentage of the population. But despite this, they managed to do some things that seem absolutely incredible, talking about the low numbers when they started. All right, so the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs actually started in 1895. They were not unusual in that Black women were organizing all over the country, and not just Black women, but white women as well, and other women. And they were starting club associations. And I put this slide up here because this is just in Philadelphia. Look at all of the different clubs. They were doing this for a couple of reasons. One is that they had built alliances to get the vote. For all women to be able to vote. And so Black women were working with some of these white women with some degree of friction, some degree of racism operating, but they had built up alliances. So Josephine St. Pierre Ruffin, and this is an image of her to the right, she was one of these women who had relations with various different white suffragettes. She had started on her own as an activist, the National Federation of Afro-American Women, the Colored Women's League of Washington, and on and on. Well, what happened, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but what happened is that one of the white women she worked with in England got a letter from a man named John Jacks, and he told her that she should not be working with the Black women. And the reason that she should not be doing it is because they were morally devoid of morality. And I'm going to quote here, they know nothing of it except as they learn by being caught for flagrant violations of law and punished thereafter. They consider it no disgrace, but rather than an honor to be sent to prison and to wear striped clothes. The women are all prostitutes and are all natural liars and thieves. So of course, this was not going to be something that went over well. And what happened is that Ruffin, St. Pierre Ruffin, called together women that from different clubs all over. She called them together for what would be the first national conference of the colored women in America. And she mentioned this letter. And again, there are controversies about the letter, and the motives behind it had to do with anti-lynching, apparently, that Ida B. Wells of the time was doing. But she called together a conference of women. She had been planning to do this anyway. And she and these women, their delegates, they all got together and they said, okay, look at this. This man is saying these terrible things about us. What are we going to do about it? And so what they did was they decided that they would federate. They would become a organization that allowed women in different states to decide their own kind of initiatives. They would tie into the larger ones, and they would work to, among other things, what they'd already been doing, taking care of Black people and looking out for the interest of Black women and Black children. They would also address some of the slanders that were thrown at them, particularly responding to this letter as one part of the impetus for a national connected organization. And up here I have some images of different clubs. This one is in Illinois. This was a kind of conference that was held in 1933. This was a Boston group. This was in Ohio. This was at a World's Fair. And then to look at some of the women who were involved in this, Mary Church Terrell, Mary McLeod Bethune, and others who were involved in this. So this was the top Black women in the nation who were involved in this. Now, the very first club in Arizona was the Phoenix Club. And this club got started in 1915 as part of this whole national organization that was going. There were over 200,000 women across the nation involved in this. Obviously far less, I believe it was a high of 300 women in the state of Arizona. But in 1915, these women got started, and they adopted as their motto, rowing, not drifting. The national organization had lifting as we climb, and many people have heard that before. It's the idea that as you move up, the more you can do for those who are even in less fortunate a situation than you, that you're going to do something for them. But the Arizona motto became rowing and not drifting. So the very first president was a Mrs. White, but other recollections and other accounts say that it was actually Mrs. Hazel Farmer. And the first club was known as the Phoenix Club, but eventually there would be 9 clubs within the city of Phoenix. The first thing this group did was they bought a building that they called the Phyllis Wheatley Center. And there were zillions of Phyllis Wheatley centers across America that Black women created. She was the first recognized poet back in, I believe it was the 1800s, wrote a lot, got a lot of acclaim. So she was someone that was considered someone to look at, not exactly a role model, but an example of what Black women could do. This building that they built, the Phyllis Wheatley Center, it became a hub of the city for Black people. The center hosted weddings and at different times served as a dormitory for female students as well as for indigent women. During the segregated war years, the club hosted programs for the military. They even had performances by then popular comedians and actors Jack Benny and Mary Livingston. And that's according to the first president, Mrs. Stewart. Farmer writes, the east side of the building was a library, the south side, a day nursery, the auditorium was a sewing center. In those days, the clubs also had their meetings at the center. And just to give you an idea of how amazing it was that these group of women that did it, that created this and were able to buy a center, most Blacks were working as domestics or personal servants. So there was no professional class to speak of that could just donate lots of money. These women were doing it all on their own. They were doing all kinds of fundraisers. So, and these are just some of the images that I have, the Phyllis Wheatley up here, and then this brochure that came from the Phoenix Women's Club. Now, the Tucson clubs actually got their start in 1935, and it was with the help of the Phoenix clubs and with an organizer from Los Angeles. The Tucson club met at times at the Dunbar Center. They, generally speaking, at the very beginning, met in other people's homes. And in Tucson, just to give you a few statistics, 72% of Blacks worked as domestic and personal service laborers. 3.1% were professional. And when I say that, I'm talking about they had 1 doctor, they had 7 teachers. So we are not talking a substantial class of people in this, roughly in this time period. Black people at the time had very limited opportunities. There were only 2 different places to go. One was a soft drink fountain and then a billiard parlor that had been established in the 1920s. These were all Black owned, and only the people who patronized these facilities were Black. So I have here a copy of one of the minutes from the Tucson Club. They decided that their first project, they wanted to make a big splash. They wanted people to really notice them. And so what they decided to do was to bring in the Williams Jubilee Singers. And at that time, America was having these, there was a kind of an interest in so-called primitivism. And so they would have different people go around, and white people were really interested, Black people as well, in having these singers give performances like the Fisk Jubilee Singers. And this, the one that they chose was the Williams Jubilee Singers. They would bring them in, and because they didn't have a lot of money, they would have a fundraiser open to all of Tucson. And that's what happened. This was advertised in the newspaper, and people were very, very, very excited about it. It was very successful. And at their next meeting, the women of the Tucson Club, the Women's Progressive and Civic Club, they all cheered. They stood up and they cheered, and they were very, very excited about it. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to play you a second or two of the Jubilee. I found their singing, so the Williams Jubilee Singers. So give me a second, and I'm going to bring that up. And if you can't hear it, somebody wave at me, but I think you'll be able to hear it. So here it is. The angel rolled the stone away, the stone away, the angel rolled the stone away, the stone away. Oh, it was on one Sunday morning, the angel rolled the stone away in the yeah, the whistle's blowing, ooh, yeah, the whistle's blowing, ooh, way beyond the... Okay, all right, so I just wanted you to hear a little bit of that. And this was very exciting. It was exciting for Black people because they were hearing some of the songs of their heritage, you know, kind of dressed up a little bit. And then white people enjoyed this also. So, and here is an actual flyer of from the Williams original Dixie Jubilee Singers, and also put up here an early picture of the Dunbar Center, where sometimes the group met, and they also were connected to, a lot of people were connected to the center. For example, one of the projects of the women's clubs, the Tucson, the Progressive Club, was to raise money to buy uniforms for the young men that were participating in football games. The club also did a number of other things. They raised money for indigent women. Give me a second. They supported the military if there were people there that needed any kind of supplies or clothing or anything. Eventually, there would be several more clubs in the Tucson area. Now, they typically met on the second and fourth Thursday each month at the Dunbar. The meetings began with prayer, with religious songs. Then they would start to discuss community issues. So there were a number of projects that were really important. They decided, and again, think of how small this community was. We're talking about no more than about 300 to 400 people in that time period, but they were bold. They decided that they would go to the mayor and they would request a park. And that was important because Black people could not go swimming in the pools, except on the very last day before the pools were cleaned. They could not go to the parks the way they wanted to. So they decided to approach the mayor and say, we want a park of our own. And Estevan was mentioned earlier in the very beginning. These Black women went to the mayor, presented their demands. The mayor asked for some statistics. They gathered them, and eventually Estevan Park came into existence. And of course, it wasn't just only the Black women, but they were the ones who originated this. And so I'm going to kind of move on because my time is running out. There were clubs all over Arizona. The Ocotillo Club was organized in 1939, the Colored Federation of Globe, and in Douglas, the Excelsior Club. And this is just one of their brochures as people met, as these women met, constantly keeping their fingers on what was going on in the community and what it was that would help them. All right, the clubs of Arizona were connected. They had formal documents that said, you know, we will have meetings together, we will share this. They became part of a connected system. They also became part of a system that connected them to regional concerns. So this enabled a lot of conventions, planning for conventions. Hundreds and hundreds of women would be there at the regional conventions, and hundreds of women would be there at the national conventions. And these are some letters just documenting that. And I got all this stuff because my grandmother, Mary Yule, became a club member in 1935 and served as a state president. All right, so when they would have these conventions, it was just an incredible deal. People would get dressed up, they would fly places, they would stay in hotels, segregated hotels, and again, working on not just a local city level and a state level, but also working on national level. All that kind of changed after integration occurred. And this was a state meeting that was held at the Pioneer Hotel that was downtown, just one of the most important, prestigious hotels in the city. And the Black women organized this. They were so proud of the effort, and it was considered very, very successful. They also continued to have social events, buffets, tea parties, all kinds of fundraisers to enact their goals. So the end of segregation, official segregation, did not mean that everything was fine. There were still ways that people were being fired. There is a report that was done in the 1930s about how Black people tended to be, you know, the thing that we know, last hired, first fired. So they were always continually involved in things. Oh, okay, all right, my time is up. So that is some of the information that I have on the Tucson Club, and they're still in existence as well.
Thank you, Dr. Sanchez. I was very inspired by that presentation. I've been inspired by all of the speakers so far, and I hope the audience members are also drawing that inspiration. I'd like to move on to our next speaker. Our next panel member is Ms. Gloria Smith. Ms. Gloria Smith is an author, historian, former lecturer at the University of Arizona African American Studies program, and founder of the Tucson chapter of the Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society. Ms. Smith previously had her own small business for African American historical tours of Tucson, and will share her unique version of a personal tour of Tucson Black history. Miss Gloria Smith.
Good morning. Let's take a tour that we used to take physically, but this time we will go virtually, and we will start our tour that I normally started at 949 East 2nd Street. That's the address of the Arizona Historical Society. Everyone could park their cars there. We would get on the bus and we would head west down Speedway. We'd make a little turn right on Oracle, go around the traffic center there at Drachman, head back towards Speedway. Now, the reason that we made that little circle was to take a look at Danny's Market. Danny's Market had been the Blue Moon Cafe. It was a segregated dance hall, and they ran a rope between the two groups. So whites danced on one side, blacks danced on the other side. But there was one particular group of people who came in and they crossed the line, and they danced with the black people, and nobody said anything. And the reason they didn't say anything, this group of people were John Dillinger and his men. John Dillinger lived in Tucson and he was captured here. He was a gangster that they even featured on Gangbusters, if you remember the radio program. So he and his men crossed the line and danced with anybody they wanted to. So you could say they integrated the Blue Moon Cafe. Laura Banks told me that at one time, even Billy Eckstein, who was a national singer, appeared at the Blue Moon Cafe. So it was very interesting place to be, but it was a segregated dance hall. So we headed on up toward A Mountain. We headed west and up the hill, and then we went into the Recreational Center there. Now that center had been provided by a lady by the name of Mrs. Benefield. She wanted to make sure that such things would happen. We were greeted by Mr. Fred Archer, a former member of the Tuskegee Airmen. And he would have a nice chart up for us and pictures and give us wonderful history about the US Air Force and the Tuskegee Airmen and the 432nd Squadron and the P-51s that flew escort for the bombers to see to the bombers were not strafed by the Germans. So therefore, he had wonderful history he could share with us. There was a lady there who served us gingerbread that I purchased for the tour and punch, and that was a pit stop for everybody. And then we would head on over to the neighborhood. But before we did that, he told us about the history of the neighborhood. Mr. Hiram Banks homesteaded the area in 1922, and then they subdivided the little areas so that people could buy places, and they built their own homes, many of them up there. And the streets were named after some of the early residents. Now, I interviewed Mr. Devereaux and Mr. Foley. They made me aware of the fact that some of the people from A Mountain actually came in from Texas, and they were cotton workers. And the first Juneteenth was celebrated about 1938. It was the railroad workers versus the people from A Mountain. So Juneteenth is held at A Mountain, and it's held because a lot of the residents came from Texas, and it was an emancipation celebration that started in Texas. So therefore, it's also one of the oldest inhabited neighborhoods in continuously Black inhabited neighborhoods in Tucson. Now we would head next toward, our next stop would be over we would head down toward the Presidio, but before we got there, we would pass a place called Barrio Anita. And this is where the Noble family lived. And one of the most famous of all of them was Dr. Laura Banks. She became a member of the school board, and she did lots of good, wonderful things for the city. She was a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha and the Lynx. And so she told us about what Noble family existed around that way. And instead of calling it Barrio Anita, some people called it Noble Land. And she, of course, was very much into the history of Dunbar School. Now we headed on downtown to the beginning places of Tucson, El Presidio. Hugh O'Connor rode in and established Tucson at that place there. And currently we have Dr. Ings, who
who is a reenactor, and he performs sometimes reenacting the life of a Black conquistador that came through. In 1533, a Black conquistador came through here, through Arizona, with Cortes and headed toward California. Now, this Black conquistador was a free African that started out in Europe, in Portugal. He found a way to get over to the Caribbean, and he worked with Ponce de Leon, the man who discovered the Fountain of Youth. And he worked with him until Ponce de Leon died. And then Juan Giraldo headed down toward Mexico City. And he was able to become a legitimate conquistador because he went through the motions with the rest of the people who invaded Mexico City. So he was a Black conquistador. And we have documentation about him being one because he published his, or at least it was published by the National Park Service, his Problanza, Problanza, which is his application for his pension. And he says, I, Juan Garrido, Black conquistador, am eligible for blah, 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 blah. Okay, so that way he is applying for his pension. He did get a job as a town crier. And he also built a monument outside the gate of Mexico City to honor the dead. Now he comes up this way with Hernando Cortes. His job is to govern the Black slaves and the Indian slaves. He is supposed to watch over them and be a leader for them. So they head this way over toward California about 1533, and then go back down to Mexico City. And he lost a lot of his fortune and he died a poor man. But we have the history of the first free Black person coming into Arizona by the name of Juan Giraldo. And his name stands for the handsome one. That's the way he chose his name. Now, the next step we would go to, stop number 3 would be the South Park neighborhood. And the South Park neighborhood is around 29th Street. And this is where we find the history of Quincy Douglas, Margaret Campbell, and Jessie Martin. In the South Park neighborhood, Quincy Douglas, who many of us know is the mother of Doreen Davis, and she happened to be on one of my tours, and she gave me a lot of history about Mrs. Campbell. Mrs. Campbell is Arizona's first African-American novelist. Her novel was Eba the Dawn. It's a novel about life in the world after the big flood. I believe she was the daughter of a minister, probably. And this book was published back in Massachusetts area, but there is a copy at the University of Arizona Special Collections. There may be have transferred over to the Historical Society, but the copy does exist. So we have this sculpture here that was put there by the Tucson chapter of Lynx, and her grandson, who happened to be a sculptor, was able to sculpture this. And you have the picture of Quincy Douglas being presented a book by Margaret Campbell. Now, Margaret Campbell lived under the ground in a two-room apartment. It is said that she came and she thought she was going to die, and she started to dig her own grave, and she found she wasn't going to. So she made a room, and then she hired some mining people to provide the other room. And they said she was a wonderful woman, very sweet. She used to appear on the radio from time to time, and she always wore a shawl and some boots. I got that information from Dr. Joel Turner, who met her and knew her and said she gave music lessons down there too. Her son lived next door, and sometimes she would babysit for them. The third person living in that neighborhood was Mrs. Martin, and she was the daughter of Caleb Martin, who was the most successful rancher in the state of Arizona in 1900. He had 360 acres of land in Wilcox, and he sold his steers, the meat from them, to the military. And so Jessie Martin comes down, and she lives in that area, and she goes to work at the university as a cook in a fraternity house. And we move on from the Presidio on down to the next place, which is the African American Museum. It's at 29th Street and Park. And we would go in there and we would hear about the McClellan saddle that the Buffalo soldiers used. And sometimes we would see information about all bits and pieces like the potbelly stove, all parts of our history. And we would stop and eat if we could. They had wonderful sweet potato pie, which a lot of us enjoyed. And some people could put in orders and they could go home with barbecue too. So after the two people that ran that was Mr. Kendricks and Mr. Shadrach Blair. We just lost Mr. Blair recently, but the two of them put together the African American Museum in South Park, as well as Mr. Kenderson. He ran the restaurant. So you could get traditional sweet potato pie there, and we were all quite happy about that. Our next stop would be, we would head on over to see the first Black school that was in Tucson. It started after statehood. Prior to that time, the children went to integrated schools. And Bubba Preston, I interviewed, and he told me about this place. Juan Marisol ran an undertaker parlor and a grocery. Now the colored school was in the part of the grocery area, and the bakery moved in to the other part where the undertaker parlor had been. And then later on, Stone Cipher's bakery took over. But Bubba Preston said, while sitting there as a child, he could smell all those wonderful, wonderful smells that come in from the bakery, and he'd get so hungry. But the school was destroyed. And as I drove by, the only thing I could show the people was the outline of the school, which was on the west side of the building. Currently, I believe there's a parking lot there where automobiles are sold. Next, we headed on over toward Dunbar School. And at Dunbar School, we met some interesting history there. First of all, Laura Nobles Banks had attended there. Someone else attended there, which was the Turner family. Now, this population of Black people had more beautiful cars than any other Black population in the country. And the reason they had such up-to-date cars, a lot of the military had their families up here, and they drove to work in their automobiles at Fort Huachuca. And so as a result, these men had beautiful cars, up-to-date cars, strong cars that they could use. And one of the people who drove one of those cars was Mr. Turner, Joel Turner's father, Anna Jolivet's father. And he was killed on the road in an accident. And I did get more information about Miss Anna Jolivet. She married the son of a Buffalo soldier, Mr. Clarence Jolivet, who was from Sonora, Arizona, because that's where his family was situated while his dad worked down at Fort Huachuca. Mr. Jolivet was one of my first tour guides. When we held the Black Heritage in Arizona conferences, I hired him to be a tour guide, and he took people down to Fort Huachuca on a Buffalo Soldier tour. Those people were so pleased. They were late coming back to the conference, but they loved what they learned about the history of the Buffalo Soldiers down at Fort Huachuca. And he continued on to be one of the tour guides when we had large groups that we wanted to take away on a tour to Fort Huachuca. And so one of the other tour guides for the Fort Huachuca tours was a Sergeant Williams, who had helped to open the post down there. So he knew the history of the post. And then we had Dr. Michael Ings from Pima College. He was very instrumental in making the Buffalo Soldier Parade a success in 1991. In addition, he had other historical things that he got involved with, like the statement that he does at the reenactment that he does at the El Presidio. After Dunbar, we would head over and kind of slow down and take a look at Estevan Park. Because of the pressure that other people had put on Mayor Jastad, he came to Morgan Maxwell and said, what can I do? What can I name that thing? And Morgan Maxwell suggested Estevan Park. It's the first park named for a Black man in the country. And Estevan was actually the person that discovered Arizona. Estevan was a Moor slave. He was an African slave from Morocco, let's put it that way, who went to Spain And when it came to the New World with Cabeza de Vaca, who was a diary keeper and a treasurer, his owner, Mr. Dorantes, and another man. And they were part of the Narvaez expedition that wound up in Florida about 1528. And they went in to look for the 7 cities of Cibola. They were supposed to be cities that were laden with gold. And the Indians in that area had not seen Black people or Spanish people, and they chased them all back out toward the Gulf of Mexico. And they were not able to come back to the place where they came in, so they had to build some ships in a hurry to get away. And those ships were not that safe. So a lot of them expired in the Gulf of Mexico. They just couldn't survive. But the 4 people in one boat, which was Dorantes, the owner of Esteban, Cabeza de Vaca, a diary keeper, another man, and Esteban, those 4 came into the shore in the Gulf, and they were captured by another group of American Indians, and they were enslaved. So all 4 of them were made slaves by different groups, and they only saw each other during harvest season when the groups got together. So they planned to escape, and they did manage to escape and headed down toward Mexico City. Now, Cabeza de Vaca went back to Spain, and he published his narrative about his adventures. The others left too, and Esteban was left to be the guide for Fray Marcos de Niza, because they were going to go back up and they were going to find the 7 cities of Cibola. And so this time, Esteban knows the territory, and the American Indians are friendly to him. And as he walked into every place, he would shake a gourd, and it would be like a welcoming thing. So Fray Marcos told him, "You go ahead and I will follow you, and you send back word about everything that you learn." So Esteban heads on over to the Zuni Pueblo in New Mexico. And someone comes back and they tell Fray Marcos de Niza that Esteban has been killed and quartered by the Zuni Indians.
All right, I hate to jump in. We're gonna have to ask you to take 1 minute and wrap up quickly.
Okay, this
so
is
that we
this
can
is
move
it.
on.
This is the end. Okay, so Fray Marcos de Niza looks over at the place, thinks it has gold, heads back down, and Coronado comes up. And this is the end of the story for Estevanico. But some people said he did not die, that he lived and fathered many children. So we have a history that takes us back to 1520, 1539, that is documented, by Fray Marcos de Niza. Thank you so much.
Thank you, thank you. And thank you, Gloria. You mentioned some definitely incredible names like the great Morgan Maxwell. Can't mention Tucson, but I've mentioned in his family, Morgan Maxwell Jr., who died a few years back. I had a great opportunity to meet him and he was on a panel that we had at for Superior Court. And also Anna Jolivet, who was a League of Women Voters member, the late great Anna Jolivet. Thank you, Gloria. Now we need to move on to question answers. Please take a moment if you'd like to submit a question. And at the bottom of your screen should be a Q&A toolbar. Just pop in and add your questions. If you want to direct it to a specific panel member, please do. We don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to begin with one question that I will direct to the panel members, and then we will go from there. First question. If a teacher wanted to include a unit on Black history in Tucson, what topics would you suggest, or what advice would you offer on how to get started? Once again, if a teacher wanted to include a unit on Black history in Tucson, what topics would you suggest, or what advice would you offer on how to get started? Debbie?
I think we should start with space and place and a sense of belonging and identifying places of belonging and establishment for Black people in Tucson, because without places of belonging, it's really difficult to have a sense of belonging. And I would start there with the spaces, and they're rapidly disappearing in Tucson, those places of African American history. Another place I want to mention before is Teatro Carmen, which was actually the Black Elks Club before it was Teatro Carmen. So that's another place of Black history that is kind of been squashed down because of an overlay of another purpose. But
thank you. Thank you, Debbie. I did not know that about Teatro Carmen. I've been by that several times and taken pictures even there. Who else? Tani Sanchez, Dr. Sanchez, would you like to respond?
Well, I think organizations are important. Looking at how Black people got together, what they did for fun, what they did for political activism. And it's very hard to put that together sometimes. But I know there was a thesis by Yancey, I can't remember his first name, and he wrote about a lot of the organizations that existed in Tucson specifically. And then local organizations have their own history, but trying to find out about them is going to be just, sometimes it's going to be a maze. People have written, there are a number of people who've written, and Gloria has compiled a lot of information, but trying to get all that together, this is my advice. Hire me or hire Gloria or hire some of us to help you. It's there, it really is. Or just ask for the resources. You actually don't have to pay for it. But putting this together in terms of a way that students could access this and then work on projects. I like the oral histories, maybe asking them to come up with the narrative, something that's hands-on, but looking at people in organizations.
Great, I'm going to try to get everyone to respond. Sadie Shaw?
Thank you. Yeah, I absolutely agree with the last two panelists who spoke on the question. Just, look at the places in town, look into the organizations and also the people, where a living history, there's still a lot of elders that can be interviewed. I would say just go into any of these organizations and tap in and, political life for Black Tucsonans is, burgeoning. There's a lot of community members who have been instrumental. I learned recently that, Mr. Clarence Boykins, I believe, was one of the people who helped get the MLK holiday established. And that was, a person in Tucson. And so I see Miss Gloria shaking her head. Maybe she has more info on the story. Go ahead, Miss Gloria.
Gloria?
The MLK March started on the campus of the University of Arizona. And one of the first police people there was Officer Seastone, and he took charge and made sure everything went right. And Reverend Bernard Jackson came over from Phoenix, and they walked around the mall. And that was the first time we ever had an MLK March in Tucson. From there, someone came the following year and they took it over to Reed Park. But Vera Lander at the time was on leave getting her PhD, and I was filling in for her as the dean. And that's how I managed to be a part of that. And the students gave me a plaque for participating. But we had a wonderful group of students and they marched around the campus, and then they had a presentation by Reverend Bernard Jackson from Phoenix. And we got wonderful cooperation from Officer Seastone and the campus police. And so I'm sorry, I don't remember the year. The students gave me a plaque that I can't find right now, but that was the first march that we had.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I was speaking about getting the holiday established, you know what I mean? But certainly there's a lot of nuances with that happening in Tucson.
Okay, thank you. Barbara, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yes, and okay. I think everything everybody has said is important. But the most important thing that a lot of times we neglect to do is document, document, document. Even the smallest of things can become great history later on. And we see a lot of times, I'm not saying all the time, we sometimes neglect to do that documentation and comparative documentation, because one person's view of our history might not be another person's view of our history. So if we can get all of that in a place, that's good. We just need to do it.
Okay. Thank you. And I'll move on to the Next question. What can we do as a community to acknowledge, maintain, and celebrate Tucson's Black history? What can we do as a community to acknowledge, maintain, and celebrate Tucson's Black history? Barbara?
I think we, to augment the Black history, we should keep doing these kinds of things, you know, actually informing people of what is and what was, and not sometimes like the Meyer Street Teatro and the Black Elks, that's forgotten a lot of times. We just don't, somehow, we don't seem to get it out or to celebrate the little things we do. So I think this kind of thing is great for informing.
Thank you. Dr. Sanchez?
One of the things I felt for decades now is that just as I have observed some Muslim families and some Jewish families, they will have like a cultural history kind of program that they'll do on Saturdays or they'll do after school. For the longest time, I felt that Black people should be involved in something like that. Make it mandatory for our children, make it mandatory that others participate, put on programs around that. But I think expecting other people to educate us probably doesn't work very well.
Okay, great. Sadie Shaw, and then Gloria, and then Debbie.
Yeah, just you know, supporting the people who are doing the work, supporting the spaces that are holding events. I know Dunbar is having an event today that everyone should attend. You know, keep supporting the festivals that we have, like the Juneteenth festival, and you know, if there's not something that you see happening in Tucson, create it, because I know there's a lot of room for more Black events, more Black organizations to be had in Tucson.
Thank you. Gloria?
And one time the Urban League had the Saturday Academy, and they used to take people out and tours around Tucson and enjoy African American history. But one way that I think we could do is to, if we're teaching it, is to provide a survey and give the opportunity to students to do independent research, which is what I did with my classes, so that if you're not interested in one topic, you could hone in on the one that you are interested in and become a specialist in that particular topic. So I recommend survey courses because it gives you a good spectrum of the history, and all of it may not be interesting to you, but some of it may be very, very vital to you.
Thank you. Debbie?
I think we need to advocate for on a legislative level and in our city and state government, the support of Black spaces, the support of cultural spaces, the support of historic spaces that reflect the true history of Tucson. And so that looks like set-asides and community development block grant monies that are particularly geared towards supporting cultural facilities, like the Dunbar, like Teatro Carmen, and so on and so forth. Another thing is that community support for resource fairs, pretty much like what Barbara was talking about, what Gloria was talking about, in terms of collecting histories as they're happening. Today's event is tomorrow's history. So having regular quarterly fairs that invite community historians, invite people to share their documents, have them scanned, have them put into an archive, the Dunbar's archive, and then you walk away with a copy of it as well. So advocacy for those types of events and organizing those types of events. Thank you.
And I just want to remind folks that this program is being recorded and will be edited and posted on the League of Women Voters website of Greater Tucson. We also have a resource section that'll have information and other links to different areas that may be of interest or mentioned today. So that'll be on our website also, and look for that in another week or so. In addition, this will also be posted and shared on Boom Goddess Radio with Jennifer Davis Page, who has done great work with Tucson African American community, being able to pass on information. So we hope to have this in 30-minute segments on Boom Goddess Radio, KXCI, with Jennifer Davis Page. So look forward to that coming out in the future also. And I would be remiss to not thank the folks who are involved with this committee, Debbie Wallace, Kate Stewart, Elizabeth Chesney, Judy Wood, Joan Caltas, Tracy Peterson, and also we have Adrian and Jeremy, who are helping today with the technical side of it that makes this program happen. One of the things you can do as an audience member is get involved with the League of Women Voters or other community organizations and be active and sort of help to support. Keep in mind, this is just part one. This is Tucson African American Black History Part 1. There is so much more to share. There are so many more people in the community that we weren't able to reach out to, but this is part 1. And we want this series to continue and touch on many aspects. So those of you who are listening who wonder, well, what about this person and what about that person? Yes, well, this is part 1. That's the beauty of it all, because there is so much. There's a rich community and rich history that hasn't been shared in the past. And we're only offering a thumbnail sketch of everything that's still to come. So stay tuned, stay involved, follow up with these panelists. They're all knowledgeable. They all have a great history and opportunity to connect you and for you to stay connected with. Support all of them. But remember the Sankofa. Follow it up and look at the Carter G. Woodson webpage and keep in mind of the Sankofa. The bird flying forward, looking backwards, reaching to the past, but also going forward to the future. Thank you everyone for joining us today and providing us with your valuable time. Thank you. Thank you, panel members. Thank you, Dr. Tani Sanchez, Gloria Smith, Debi Chess, Barbara Lewis, Sadie Shore. Thank you. We appreciate you and we love you. Thank you.